Good evening. Welcome to the Highland Heights Church of Christ. See a few new faces here tonight, and I recognize a few even with your mask on. So we're really happy that you're here. And for those of you who are watching online, if you've never been in our midst and experienced the love and fellowship of this congregation, you're missing out on something great. We invite you to come whenever you feel comfortable. We know some people are still struggling. I know some people are going to come back for the first time this Sunday, but we really are excited about getting back together and enjoying our fellowship. And even though we're spaced out a little bit for precautionary, but we can still feel a lot of love and a lot of Christian warmth here. Talking about some of our family, probably most of you have heard that B. Hallam's son Gary passed away yesterday, and there will be visitation for the family Friday from 3 p.m. to 8 p.m., then again on Saturday from 12 noon to 2 p.m., and then at 2 p.m. will be the funeral service at Sellers Funeral Home here in Lebanon. And so you want to please remember B. Hallam's and all of her family, Gary's family. Also, remember, Sunday morning we'll have our first guest speaker. Will be speaking to us, Keith Pickard, and he grew up at Highland Heights until he was about 7, and then he moved to Highland Heights in Smyrna until he went off to college. So many of you older members will remember the Pickards, and we'll want to make sure we give him a nice warm welcome, he and his wife, Anna. And they're expecting a baby in December, and so just we'll be praying for Keith. And then the following Sunday, we'll also have a guest speaker, and it'll be Neil Mathis, and he's from Tompkinsville, Kentucky, and he has 3 children, a wonderful wife. And so besides their speaking during our regular worship, we'll begin having a Bible class just in the auditorium immediately after our worship service. So you'll get to hear them speak twice, and so be praying for that. Okay, I don't have any other slides tonight for what I had prepared to say. And I'm going to leave this slide up during the message if people are watching online want to text a prayer request. We've had people even virtually come forward and confess sins or ask for prayers and things, since we've had those as well. So we're going to leave that up. But I'm sure many of you have heard the story about the mother-in-law that just bragged on her son-in-law because he would let her daughter sleep in late, and then he would bring her breakfast in bed with all of the nice things, and then he would take her out to lunch wherever she wanted to go and buy her expensive gifts. She couldn't brag enough on her son-in-law. But she also had a daughter-in-law, and she couldn't say anything good about that daughter-in-law. She wanted her son to let her sleep in late, and she wanted her son to bring her breakfast in bed and then take her out to eat and buy her expensive gifts. She was just no good. Well, we can see how ridiculous that is, because it's the same thing. It depends on your perspective. She's looking out for her son and not her daughter. And so our perspective really determines how we see things. And and that's true in everything in life, and it's just normal. That's just the way it is. That's an exaggerated case, and it's that I was just sharing that with you, how 2 situations would be the same, but because your perspective changes, your opinion of that situation changes radically. Well, that's just normal. But God doesn't want Christians to be normal. If somebody strikes you on the cheek, what's Jesus said? What did he say to do? Turn the other cheek. That's not normal, but that's God's way. Or he said, if the soldier obligates you to carry his backpack a mile, Jesus said to do what? To carry it too. And so Christians are to live a different life and have a different point of view. So how we react to adversity as Christians is so different than when we were in the world. If somebody offended us in the world, we would escalate to show them how much we didn't appreciate that, or we didn't like that, or you're not going to get away with that, or I've got my rights, or you're going to see who you're messing with. That's the normal reaction. But as Christians, we're not like that. Jesus said in Matthew, open your Bibles up to Matthew chapter 5. We're going to read verses 9 through 16. These are the part of the Sermon on the Mount here. Matthew chapter 5, verses 9 through 16. Beginning at verse 9. Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." Some versions, some translations say children of God. The idea is the same. If you're a peacemaker, that's what God's children do. That's what they're supposed to be like. In verse 10, he says, "Blessed," or happy, "are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake." People mistreat you because you're trying to do God's will, not because you're doing evil, you're doing bad things. But if people mistreat you because you're trying to do God's will, he says, "For theirs is the kingdom of heaven." That's the way God's people live. Verse 11. "Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account." We really don't know a whole lot of persecution here in this country, but it's very real and alive in other countries. Christians have been boarded up in church buildings and the buildings set on fire. People have been beaten and killed, and we just don't realize, and those things are going on to this day. Verse 12, he says, "Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You," verse 13, "are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet." In other words, Christians are to be special, to make a difference in society. Verse 14, Jesus says, talking about his followers, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who's in heaven." So, one of the greatest ways that Christians can shine and show the world a difference that Jesus makes in our lives is that when people mistreat us, we don't mistreat them. We don't seek vengeance. We don't seek to even the score. But we live a different life. We live a peaceful lives. Now, in the last couple of weeks, we've seen some terrible situations going over, and especially if you saw the video about George Floyd dying at the hands of the police officer, you were repulsed and sickened. I wouldn't even let Becky see it. It was just so terrible. But what people don't understand is even the police themselves all over the country were appalled at that situation. And so actually people went out to protest legally and legitimately and with purpose. But then soon some people hijacked the protest, the constitutionally legal protest. The people wanted to show their displeasure and their disgust. And so other people came along and started looting and rioting and burning and killing and destroying. And so all of a sudden now, people don't remember anything about George Floyd or the purpose and the intent of the protests, but now they've forgotten all of that, and everybody's focused on all the destruction and the rioting. And now no one, and it's such a shame. It was hijacked from these protesters, and tons of innocent people were hurt, damaged. An amazing amount of violence and money was spent, and spirituality, people were damaged as well. And so much of this were in the actual communities where these protesters lived and live. So you can see how sometimes an ungodly reaction to an ungodly situation can bring greater destruction than what first happened. We talk about somebody shooting themselves in the foot. I don't think I'm a racist. My son-in-law, my daughter-in-law, my grandkids are mixed race children. I work with people. Sometimes I would know somebody for years and I'd look at a picture and all of a sudden I notice, oh, they're black. It hadn't really just registered, because Brazil, everybody's every color. So I'm not saying anything about this, but I'm saying, for example, when some of the football players were kneeling during the national anthem, they may have a just cause. I'm not questioning their cause, but they're doing it in a way that's masking their cause. And people don't see, they're shooting themselves in the foot. People don't see anything about the cause and what they're trying to express, because they're creating perhaps a greater problem or diverging the solution. And people can't see a solution because of a secondary problem that they're causing out of something they're trying to protest. Well, it's easy to point fingers at other people, but I think, at least I have, and probably you have as well, you've done the same thing. You've shot yourself in the foot on many occasions. I have. Teens, for example, when you grow up and you get to be teenagers, you young people, listen here. You want to be treated like an adult. You want your independence. You want your parents to respect your individuality. But you act like a child to try to get it. I did. I know when I first started driving, I asked my dad to borrow the car, and he would always loan me the car. If he wasn't going to be using it, he would always loan it to me. And it was the gas, he paid for all the gas, the insurance and everything. I would use his car. But as I would go out the door, and inevitably he would say, drive careful. And as an immature teenager, that would make me mad. I'm thinking he thinks I'm not responsible. He thinks, and one day I yelled back at him as I was going out the door, do you think I'm going to wreck the car on purpose? Well, that was just childish. It was his car, his gasoline. He's doing me a favor. And yet, rather than seeing that as somebody who cared about me and cared about his car, I see that as a criticism and distrust. And so, you teenagers, sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot because we want so bad to be seen as grown up and responsible and treated like an adult, and yet we act like a children trying to get what we want. And it's going to backfire. And so, if you want to be treated as an adult, if you want more freedom and more liberty in your relationship with your parents, then show responsibility, show maturity. Be truthful in everything you say. Do your chores without your parents having to tell you to do them. And they'll see you're taking on responsibility and being trustworthy, and you'll get what you want rather than shooting yourself in the foot. But another way that we tend to shoot ourselves in the foot is that couples, relationships. I've performed my first wedding ceremony 45 years ago, and haven't got it all figured out yet, but I've had a lot of experiences with married couples, and actually this Friday evening I'm going to be doing a couples retreat in Brazil over the internet with the Google Meet and all the different people and things. They invited me to do that, and they're all going to be dressed up in their own houses and watching. I thought it was pretty original and everything. But couples, every couple, you're trying to figure out. When you said I do, when we're married, we become one. But during the first years of our marriage, we're trying to decide which one we are, and trying to figure that out and how that works and whose will and how, and contracts and just all those things. And so sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot. Maybe our spouse did something that we didn't like. Maybe it was the way they spent the stimulus check, or the way we're going to spend our day off, or whatever. And so I'm going to show that I didn't like that. And I'm going to just get a sour look on my face and slam the door as I leave. I'm going to go out with my friends. Well, we're trying to communicate through the back door, and it just doesn't work that way. Especially, guys are not very observant. They just would say, wow, she's not feeling well, or I sure married a cranky woman, rather than understanding that maybe I didn't spend that check well, or maybe I didn't spend my time well, or a wife, maybe wasn't considered enough with this, or so I didn't like the tone of voice. And so we do something to show that we're displeased, and all we're saying is that I'm a nasty, ugly person, and maybe I do realize what you're displeased about, but because you acted that way, I don't care that you're displeased. I'm still going to do what I want to do. So things don't get better, and we shoot ourselves in the foot. We want our relationships to go well. We want everything to be, as God wants it to be, but we act in carnal ways. And so these are things that couples, and maybe it's in your workplace. You're trying a colleague of yours, and you want to show them you don't appreciate something, but rather than just coming out and talking about it and sharing with them and tell them that how you'd feel better if this and happened or something, you start, maybe I don't talk to them or just be real short with them, and it just doesn't work that way. So what do we do if we act and we find ourselves in this situation? 3 things. First of all, be careful how and when you discuss a problem. They always say, don't talk about things when you're tired. Maybe when you come home from work and you're both exhausted, or you're hangry. When you're hungry, needing to eat, and your blood sugar's low, and just kind of irritable and not as much patience. That's not a good time to talk about something. And so find a good time to talk about it. Another thing that would help, if you would write the situation down, write the problems out. First of all, to clarify things in your own mind. A lot of times people are dissatisfied, but they really don't know why they're dissatisfied. They don't know exactly what it is. So writing it down helps you maybe clarify in your own mind just exactly what's going on that's maybe not right or needs to be changed. I hear so often systemic racism. I'm not the brightest person in the world, but I'm not the dumbest person either. And I've tried to look it up and I've tried to research it. And I've really never been able to find anybody who could just really clearly, with black and white, put it into words. What is that? What does that mean? And how can we correct that? And in what ways? And so, and the people that I would see express and talk about it, basically they would say, well, you can't really put your finger on it because but it penetrates every area of society and this. But if we can't identify something, a problem, then we certainly will not be able to find a solution for it. And so write it down, help you to clarify what you want to talk and what you want to say, what the problem you perceive the problem as, and then maybe you can share it in a calm and non-attackful way. That person to see that you want your relationship to get better and not worse. And then, of course, last of all, bathe your relationship in prayer. James 5 says that the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. Pray that God would give you love and wisdom, and that He'll help you to remember that your enemy is not your spouse, it's not your colleague at work, it's not your neighbor, but it's Satan. Look with me in Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 13. Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 13. Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 13. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of His might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. Now, verse 12 is the most important. Look at this. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. In other words, our enemy isn't your wife, your husband, your children, your parents. It's not your neighbor. But we wrestle against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in heavenly places. So in other words, our enemy is Satan. Verse 13, therefore take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm. So where are we now? Well, we've improved throughout our nation's history. We've abolished slavery, which is obviously a very important step. In the mid-60s, we had the civil rights laws, which was just as important, and that was attained and for a large part with Martin Luther King Jr., through peaceful protests. As a matter of fact, he himself said that, "I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, by the content of their character." Dr. Ben Carson said, "We need to recognize that we, the American people, are not each other's enemies. We should not succumb to those who are trying to make us believe that we are enemies, to divide and conquer." He said, "I've never seen a situation where violence, activity of this nature," talking about the riots, "accomplishes something good. It only accomplishes bad." Mahatma Gandhi, as many of you know, that he helped to liberate India from British rule and through peaceful protests. And he said, "When I despair, I remember that all through history, the ways of truth and love have always won. There have been tyrants and murderers, and for a time they can seem invincible, but in the end, they always fall." Think of it, always. So the real solution is not better laws. The real solution is better character for our nation. You know, not all blacks are criminals, not all whites are racist, and not all cops are bad. It's a question of that we realize that man is messed up. Romans 3:23 says all of sin comes short of the glory of God. We realize that we're sinners, and without God's help, we'll continue to do things that are terrible. The Bible says that if we believe that Jesus came and sacrificed himself on a cross, and if we're ready to turn the direction of our lives over to him and are united with him in baptism and walk with Jesus until our death or until he comes to take us home, our lives will be changed. Look with me, the last verse I want to share with you this evening is Titus chapter 3, verses 1 through 9. And this is the result of people who have accepted Jesus, surrendered to Jesus as Lord of their lives. Titus chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. Paul writes Titus, and he's left Titus in Crete to continue with the maturation process of the church. And he says in verse 1, "Remind them to be submissive to rulers and authorities." And this is when Nero was emperor of Rome, the Roman Empire. "Remind them to be submissive to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready for every good work." Verse 2, "To speak evil of no one." That means even the President of the United States, or of Rome, or of your neighbor, or of church leaders. Christians are different. They're submissive. They're ready for every good work. They don't go around speaking evil of people. And they avoid quarreling, to be gentle, to show perfect courtesy toward all people. That eliminates racism right there. I don't believe the United States is a racist country. I believe we have racists, just as we have sinful people in every walk of life. But what's really going to change our country, what's really is a solution to our problems, is not better laws, but better character, better relationships in Christ Jesus. And to close, I want to quote here Wes McAdams. He wrote this week, "Peacemaking is brutal. There will be attacks from every direction, from all the people you're trying to love and reconcile. You will make mistakes, lots of them. You will misspeak. You will be misunderstood. And the real peace only comes in the end, when the peacemakers hear from the Prince of Peace, 'Well done, good and faithful servants.' But oh, how sweet it will be to hear these words. So have the courage to be peacemakers. Promote kingdom solutions to the world's brokenness. Love people, not just in word, but in deed and in truth. And don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." Let's stand and sing.